You might have heard the expression buy once, cry once, and that is a super relevant expression in the shop. When you bring your car to a mechanic, you want to know what you need to do. Sometimes you can skimp out, and sometimes you really need to spend some money. This video, we're going to talk about those topics.
Customer's always going to want the cheapest option, and that is understandable, but in a lot of cases, you're going to want to pay a little bit more for a quality part or repair that will actually last. Let's get into it.
So the first thing on the list are tires. There's so many different options out here, and personally, I think that this is one of those areas that you should probably spend a little bit more on, depending on what your application is.
Yeah, definitely. There are so many ways to do tires wrong. I used to live near a place that sold used tires, and they did a pretty brisk business, but I was not exactly a customer. At the same time, I think you can also pay too much for tires. Not everybody needs a full-on performance tire, which I think, Nick, you would know a bit about.
You definitely don't want to just buy the most expensive tire because it may not be appropriate for your applications. I mean, if it's a car that you don't drive a lot, you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of tires. If they're going to dry rot before they're going to wear out, you don't need a 60,000 mile tire. You know, you can get away with a 30,000 mile tire.
Let them know that they might be rolling on these for a while, and it's going to be a good experience the whole way through. If you buy a nicer tire than the very bottom of the barrel stuff, letting them think about it in terms of time and mileage might help to offset those costs a little bit. This is going to be around maybe until you sell the vehicle, so don't skimp out. You guys are going to be together for a while. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about would be wiper blades. This is another frequently replaced item that your customers might be asking about. Do I get the cheap ones, or are the premium things really worth spending extra on? What's been your experience?
I mean, my opinion, I buy the cheap. I'd rather have new ones every single year than spend $30 or $40 on ones and, you know, have to keep them. Feel like I'm married to them for 4 years because I spent so much money on them.
I don't know, I kind of like the more expensive ones because there have been plenty of times where there's a torrential downpour outside and I've got those cheap wiper blades that just aren't doing the job. So those nice expensive ones that you know, they wick the rain off, gives me that peace of mind when I'm driving.
Yeah, it's not just pushing the water around, it's actually wiping the windshield.
It's actually wiping your windshield.
I think there's something to be said about you know, people, you know, giving cheap wipers a bad name. They really don't have a clean windshield. You really got to clean your windshield. If you don't clean your windshield often, it pays to actually scrape any type of like debris or, you know, tar, things like that, so that it can actually wipe clean, because honestly, a lot of times the windshields are too dirty to wipe no matter what kind of wiper you have.
Yeah, the blade's not the problem.
Yeah, and using Rain-X, the solution on it actually helps. You know, it's going to help make any wiper work perfectly.
Sure.
So the next topic, which is very common because there's so many of them, fluids. I mean, from oil to coolant to, you know, all the different fluids, transmission fluid.
A lot of cases, I think if there's like a specified OE fluid, especially certain vehicles have only one or two fluids that they'll accept for different parts of the vehicle. You know, your hands are tied. That's what you've got to run. And I think you could really get into trouble trying to take shortcuts. Not that any shop should be doing that, but a customer might try it, and that's just no good. But outside of that, maybe something like an engine oil where you have a lot of different options to choose from. I'd get something reputable, something brand name, but I think as long as the fluid is meeting the standards that the vehicle's asking for, you'll probably be fine. So you could save a few bucks doing some research there. Just make sure that it is what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, agreed. I preferably like to change my oil more often, and you know, recommend my customers to get more frequent oil changes, so don't necessarily need to use the best oil if you're changing it frequently.
Probably better to spend that money on getting it changed on time or maybe a little bit early, instead of trying to squeeze life out of it beyond what it's rated for.
So another thing to take into consideration is the type of vehicle. Obviously, like a lot of these vehicles now, they're high compression, they make a lot of power. You know, it's not uncommon to find a 400 horsepower vehicle off the lot, and those vehicles call for, you know, expensive oil.
Right. That's why you bought a performance vehicle, so that it can.
So it can perform.
It's not going to do that for long if you don't continue to take care of it. You're once you've entered into that world, you have to stay there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that a customer might not think about as much are bushings. And I know that there's a whole bunch of options out there, but as someone who is an avid DIYer, how do you choose what material you're going to go with?
Yeah, I think it comes down mostly to how hard is it to install this? Do I have to burn these bushings out? Do I need to press? How difficult of an install am I looking at? Often the polyurethane ones are pretty easy to install.
Right. Another major thing to consider when replacing bushings and considering a poly bushing is the sound. They're stiffer, they're squeaky, they're noisier, they're going to cause more vibration, and that may not be the best option to put in a daily driver for a family.
Yeah, and you might have to have kind of a hard conversation with the vehicle owner and say, listen, this is what I've got for you.
Yep.
We can go this way, it's cheaper, but if you plan to keep this vehicle for a while and you care about things like your vehicle being quiet and not riding stiff, it's going to cost you, but we have to replace the whole piece.
Yep.
Helping them understand why you're doing that, what their options are, might make them a little bit less upset.
Yeah, agreed. Another part that's really important to communicate with your customers is brake pads and the different options they have in brake pads. When you're talking about replacing something as critical, safety critical as a brake pad, you want to make sure that the brake pad is going to be appropriate and also not kind of annoy the customer. So I always try to give the customer the option. You could go with metallic brake pads, which are going to have the better braking, but it's going to give you a lot more dust and maybe some more noise. I really want to go through those options and allow them, educate them on making the best decision that they can.
Yeah, I mean, the expensive pads aren't always the best pads.
Yep.
But I think that there's a lot of experience that you need to be able to apply to these specific situations. As someone who commutes daily in over an hour of traffic, I want the brakes that are not going to squeak, because that just adds a little bit more strain on my daily drive. So personally, I'm going to go with the OE pads because I've found that they don't squeak as much as aftermarket.
Yeah, I think it's just as important to find a brake pad that matches the customer's safety and functional requirements just as much as it doesn't annoy them. I know some people hate cleaning their wheels. I see people rolling white wheels. I don't know how you live with that, but in that case, you might not want a pad that sheds very much dust. And certain combinations of vehicles and pad materials just don't work. So paying up a little bit extra, if that's what it costs for that peace of mind, that lack of annoyance every time you drive, that's pretty nice.
Yeah, and ironically, the people that require a high performance brake pad, those are also the people that don't want the brake dust, but those are the ones that are making it the most.
So next topic we're going to take a look at would be chassis and suspension. And I think this is another place where you really need to get an understanding of what somebody wants from the vehicle before you go spending a bunch of money. These parts can get pretty expensive quickly. Once you start looking at upgrades, performance parts, things can spiral out of control pretty quickly.
One important thing to consider, though, is also the labor cost, because a lot of these chassis components are really labor intensive. You need alignment afterwards. You also got to consider the use of the vehicle. Is it a work truck where it's carrying heavy loads, things like that. We make a premium RD line, which is metal on metal ball joints that won't wear as fast as a polymer ball joint would. So these are really important factors to consider when you're doing these chassis repairs.
Yeah, it might make it easier to work with, and it might help it to last a little bit longer because now you're using upgraded parts for the thing that you're actually doing with the vehicle.
Yeah, having greasable joints in your sway bar end links in your ball joints, things like that, that's going to make them last a lot longer. Obviously, as long as they're being greased. Because that's the big problem. The greasable ball joints, when people overlook them, then they're going to fail even faster.
I know a lot of the work that I did was in a college town where it was a bunch of college kids. They just needed their car to work. They were not looking to spend a lot of money on the fancy shocks or anything like that. They just needed something that was going to get them from point A to point B.
And I'm not sure that fancy shocks would have done all that much anyway for a 99 Cavalier.
Probably not.
I just need it to work. I just need it to work. Another thing to think about is whether or not they are coming from a reputable brand. There's a lot going on inside of, let's say, suspension parts, right? They're maybe a little bit more complex than like chassis piece, but inside of that suspension, how tight are the tolerances? Is this thing rebuildable? You're not really getting an improvement if you're buying a low quality thing that just looks pretty on the outside.
Exactly. I think there's a lot, like with the internet and a customer doing their own research, it's really easy to look at a brand and just because you see them out and about that you think that they've done all the due diligence. And I was one of those people, I thought, that this is a big company, they must have done their due diligence, but after working here, seeing the stuff that goes into it, and then finding out what a lot of competitors don't do, it's mind-blowing. You know, for safety critical parts, it's a huge factor. So I think the biggest takeaway from this is definitely to educate your customers, really talk to them about their needs and different options that they have for their vehicles. If you like this video, check out our shop press. We have a lot more like this. For Dorman Products, I'm Nick, this is Miriam, Greaser, we're out of here.